kickstarting an enterprise transformation using lean startups. For those that attended Jeff Anderson's talk, this is going to be a 5-minute version. So enterprise transformations are failing. Why? Because it costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time, and results in a lot of disruption. Just like the Boston Big Dig over here, enterprise transformations are large and complex with a lot of different variables. What we need to be able to do with enterprise transformations is be able to test and make assumptions to identify what's going on. Typically, an enterprise transformation places significant emphasis on strategy and planning up front. While this looks good on paper, it often falls short on execution. Why? Because organizations are diverse. They have a lot of unexpected events occurring during execution. Pace of change, culture, these are just some aspects that are very hard to predict up front early on when you're just planning. Furthermore, the traditional approaches to enterprise transformation promise payoff years down the road. What ends up happening though when we get to that point is these transformations provide an elusive payoff. Organizations today are no longer willing to wait for that investment to pay off so long down into the future. So what's the alternative? Well, at its core, an enterprise transformation is about people and change. But this type of change is uncertain and difficult. We need to have a model or a framework to be able to harness this uncertainty and be able to drive the transformation forward. Another domain exists, that of the startup world, that also deals with this uncertainty at the beginning. We can use the models in the startup world and apply it to enterprise transformations. So one of those models, the Lean Startup Framework, been mentioned a lot during this conference, takes a product delivery, breaks it down into minimal viable products for the purposes of learning. Why? Because we're making assumptions. We need to be able to test those assumptions by actually delivering the product and making sure that there's an actual customer base. By this definition, an enterprise transformation could be a startup. Why? Because there's assumptions that we make about the transformation beforehand that we need to have valid in order for a successful transformation. So how do we do this? How do we apply this model? Well, we take the vision and the strategy, which happens for every transformation, and we break it down into what we coin as the minimal viable change, or the minimum introduction of change capable of providing some learning. So it's not just about executing the transformation, it's about learning and adapting. Here's an example of one transformation. We took the vision, the strategy, and broke it down into these minimal viable changes, and then started testing the assumptions so that we could validate them. What we did with the MVC once we had them is take them through a learning cycle. These learning cycles were designed to be short, about 2 to 4 weeks long, with the emphasis on getting fast feedback. At any point in this cycle, we could, if we've learned enough, we would be able to identify whether the MVC was successful or not. In the preparation stage, what we did was we took the MVC, I defined it, identified what behaviors we were targeting within the organization, and then identified who was it within the organization that we wanted to introduce it to. In the introduction stage, we took the normal practices, coaching, training, interactive workshops, and we introduced the MVC to that target audience. In the next stage, once we found that folks were somewhat adhering to or using the principles or the behaviors, we moved to an observation state. And here we took a step back. For example, a stand-up, we would take a step back, let them run with it, and then after a certain time period, we moved into what we call the measure state. And in the measure state, what we did was looked at our target, which we specified in the preparation stage, and looked at what actually happened. What were the actual changes in behavior that we saw? What were the skills that folks were starting to exhibit? It wasn't an exact science, but we looked at what was changing. What we did once a week is we introduced a retrospective where the change team got together, looked at our observations, looked at our measurements, and asked the question, are we on the right track? Do we pursue and scale? Or do we need to make a pivot? We need to change our transformation strategy completely. How did we track all this change? Well, we used a Kanban board. We visualized the change that we implemented as well as limited the amount of change we were introducing into the organization. Here's just a quick example on this at work. This is our Kanban strategy within the organization. At first, we took a few pivots because of the unique nature of the client. We had to pivot a little bit, but then we were able to find an MVC that actually worked, and we were able to scale it. So just in conclusion, overall, what we found is the Lean Startup approach brings a fast feedback approach to change management, one that the transformation team can adapt during execution, change our tactics quickly and easily, and be able to run a transformation.